Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute personal treat and professional treat for me to work with Trustfull and Marco and the team. When I first started off in the business, we focused on creating one of the first mobile identity solutions in the marketplace with Build-A-Mobile, which was a payments platform. We were one of the innovators in early mobile payments. And the team noticed a lot of fraud in that, and so we addressed it with mobile identity and authentication. So we were one of the pioneers, and it's evolved so much since then. In fact, I remember pivoting quite a bit in the early years and was rewarded with some very, very good solutions that our team brought to market. But it's nowhere near the amount of sophistication that we have today. I've also advised a number of companies from the data field to fraud solutions to verification solutions, the entire spectrum of what I call identity orchestration, and have served on a number of advisory boards. And so I have expertise and knowledge across a variety of identity solutions. Trustfull certainly has an exciting solution set that should be around the market for a long time. When I first started off, almost a decade ago, the industry was all about verification, and it had a number of vectors to use for identity. It had knowledge-based authentication, it had passwords, and certainly the evolution of two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, really started the industry in force. And to this date, it's evolved quite a bit. We see very sophisticated forms of identity and challenges that lie ahead, certainly with artificial intelligence. The sophisticated forms include behavioral types of identity, where you can measure the gait of a person, the cadence of how they type, etc. Really sophisticated type of identity pieces. And so as I look at the evolution, it's evolved quite a bit, but it's evolved with the challenges that take place. What I really liked about Trustfull is that it didn't require a specific route to take. It basically did a lot of what I call the pre-KYC checks with data that was available in the industry, and it was able to verify through those data exhausts that exist publicly and in some cases privately. It's able to assess the efficacy of a person, of an entity that's doing the transactions. Very, very good stuff, and they do it at a global scale with the global checks. When I first started off in the industry, I focused on being able to do this globally, and it's a massive challenge. There's different regulations in different countries. I think Trustfull's cracked the code on that, and so it's evolved not only with the challenges of identity and fraud, but it's evolved very, very well. There's a lot of interesting and innovative events occurring in the industry right now. Specifically, fraud has evolved. It started with a lot of account takeovers, and it's evolved to a number of form factors around fraud. Certainly first-party fraud, an issue today, it continues to be, has been an issue for a while. Bust-out fraud, all types of first-party fraud, and there's different categories. Very sophisticated types of farming of identity has always been a challenge. Add on top of that the fact that you now have artificial intelligence that can create personas, that can create what we call synthetic humans. That'll be a challenge in the future. These fraudsters are taking their time to create an identity, a synthetic human, and also add a lot of history behind that so it seems real. So that instead of verifying a person and then constantly authenticate them, what Trustfull can do is take all the exhausts that exist publicly and say, this makes sense. This transaction makes sense. This person makes sense for the way they're transacting. And that's very, very powerful versus some fraud systems, some identity platforms and solutions that will require a lot of information from the consumer, and that creates a lot of friction. And that's the last thing you want when you're in stream in the middle of a transaction. So the appeal of the customer, not creating friction, not creating problems or challenges for onboarding or anything like that, plus the security of assessing with global checks if the customer signature or exhaust is real is very, very powerful. I've seen a lot of companies in the industry that have evolved, that have pivoted and created new solutions. Years ago, about 6 years ago, it was all about orchestration, being able to, instead of customers or enterprises taking 50 different point solutions, there were a number of platforms which said, hey, why don't we serve as an orchestration layer? Enterprises can come through us and all the other vendors can subscribe to us. And that varied, right? Sophisticated banks with armies of technical people, identity professionals said, you know what, we'll determine what goes into our stack, so we'll take the point solutions, despite having multiple contracts to arrange. What I really liked when I first met Trustfull was the ease of the concept with which they said, hey, before we get to KYC, we can do a pre-KYC with the information that exists, with the natural exhaust and data that exists in the public marketplaces. We can take that and say, you know what, based on our assessment, we determined that this is a legitimate customer. That saves a lot of time, a lot of hassle for the customer, and it also shows a marked decline in fraudulent type of behavior. Going forward, I see a lot of innovation that Trustfull is bringing to the marketplace, especially around artificial intelligence. In my own company, Athenium, we've deployed MCP, which is a model context protocol, which is really a plugin for AI native platforms. And they've taken advantage of that. And to me, the winners in the future are companies that have proprietary data, unique data sets, which Trustfull does, companies that have expertise, which Trustfull does, and a powerful platform with which to leverage all that, which Trustfull does. It's not only evolving from the MCP, but other types of artificial platforms. Very, very powerful stuff. And I think that's a winning combination. With the customer in mind, minimize friction, with the full force of combating fraud. I think that's the right combination going forward. So as I think about the future and the future of fraud prevention, on everyone's mind is artificial intelligence. And what does that mean? It certainly has evolved, and it's evolved quickly. The best expression I heard the other day was from a customer of mine that said, it feels like a 100-yard sprint with no finish line. And that resonated with me because as I look at what artificial intelligence is doing, we're now in the agentic model, right? We have agents that are transacting, and we now have to have agents that transact with those agents. Well, are they legitimate? Should we be doing business with them? And at what speeds can that be done? Does that agent truly represent the end customer? So you have a myriad of other challenges that come into place. Trustfull is addressing those problems in a very powerful way with the traditional data sets, but now implemented into agentic models that will solve a lot of the fraud problems that are presenting themselves in today's modern challenge. It's an exciting time. I think also the ability to pivot, the ability that Trustfull has to pivot, and I think that's due in large part to the leadership. I've known Marco for a long, long time. He's a very resilient, very strong CEO, and he's got a hell of a team beneath him that I think innovate in the manner necessary to really address future challenges and issues.